Hello, I'm Joe Deems. Welcome to part two of our two-part interview with Senator Ben Nelson. Once again, Senator, welcome again to our show.
Thank you, Joe. It's good to be back with you.
My first question I want to ask you today is, what role do you believe that the NAIC should be playing with respect to the federal regulation of insurance?
Well, because insurance is a part of everybody's life in America, there's no doubt that the federal government has a keen interest in the subject. But the states have been functioning as the regulator of the insurance industry for almost 150 years and has done an outstanding job of providing a solid regulatory base for solvency and for markets and the like. But in spite of all that, there have been some areas where the federal government has felt necessary and has stepped in, for example, with flood insurance and terrorism risk insurance, which just aren't available thus far in the private market. So the federal government has had a role, and I think a welcomed role, in stepping in to provide coverage for both flood insurance and TRIA, or terrorism risk insurance, because of the advent of 9/11 and the concern about other terrorism potential that we have. Probability of risk it may be fairly low, but obviously the size of risk that is there of any kind of a loss, as in the case of 9/11, is significant. So there's a relationship there between the federal government and the states, and I think it's overall working very well.
Let's take it a step farther. What role do you believe the NAIC should play in the context of international insurance regulation? And in particular, do you believe that the NAIC should play a role with respect to the activities that are taking place right now with the International Association of Insurance Supervisors?
Well, the NAIC was one of the founding members and provided the seed money for this IAIS. So it's had an integral part and role from the very beginning. And that's important to continue to have dialogue with international regulators to make sure that we're working for, if you will, the best practices in regulation, sharing ideas, sharing methodologies. We've engaged in what is called the ORSA, or the Own Risk Assessment process for insurers. That came as a result of a lot of international discussions, and other countries have engaged and taken on some of the activity and the methodologies of the state-based system. So there is a role to be played, but that role is one of exchanging information. It is not one of being subservient to any international regime that is created or is put together by the IIS. That is done at the federal level here with Congress, and most closely with the states. It will continue to be a state-based system, but there's obviously an interest in having relationships internationally.
Having said that, then, what do you believe the role of the Federal Insurance Office should be in this process?
Well, it's a limited role. Dodd-Frank established the FIO, or Federal Insurance Office, to have a limited role to do certain things, and particularly represent the federal government as appropriate internationally. Now, as appropriate, it needs to be looked at very closely. The role is spelled out in the Act, and it specifically says that the FIO is not a regulator. It's not an insurance regulator. So there's no regulatory authority or responsibilities that the FIO has. But it has a role to play, very well spelled out in Dodd-Frank.
I'm going to switch gears with you for a little bit here, Senator. I forgot to ask this earlier, and that is, there's a lot of talk in and among members of the industry between regulators, the NAIC, and the insurance industry in general regarding the NAIC's accreditation process and the accreditation program. Do you believe that the NAIC accreditation program affects captive insurance companies and risk retention groups, and if so, how so?
Well, it does affect those entities because it's specifically aimed at dealing with those entities. That's one of the accreditation processes and the Model Act that the NAIC has put together and the states have passed is an important part of accreditation, to try to get it as uniform as possible. As a matter of fact, after the advent of the Model Act and as it was enacted, I think there was a more, if you will, consistent and uniform regulation of RRGs. Now, at the present time, there's a consideration of expanding the accreditation process, and that is being reviewed right now by the NAIC, by the states, and should that get adopted, the changes adopted, then that will go back, and the NAIC and the states will, over maybe 2-3 year period, try to get those changes enacted at the state level.
Senator, do you have any thoughts on how the NAIC and the risk retention industry can work better together?
I sure do. I think the fact that we're having this dialogue right now is a good indication that we can have informal dialogue to the extent that we can solve things informally by talking and working with one another in a very friendly environment. That's good. And in some cases where it may be more technical or it may be require more formal review, that's what the court system is about, just in case we have differences of opinion. But we don't have to be adversarial in each and every case. We can find solutions if we're willing to sit down and talk. There is a place for risk retention groups, and there's a place because of the lack of traditional markets. So let's just find ways to have more conversations and more dialogue, and who knows, maybe we can solve most of our problems that way. Certainly it's preferable. Thank you.
Senator, the vast majority of these matters are resolved through more informal means, and I want to thank you again for being a guest on our show. And again, I want to thank the members of our audience, the viewers like you who are watching this interview on WRIN TV.
Well, thank you, Joe.